Good day, and thank you so much for joining us today. We are talking advanced technologies for defense and military today, and really that intersection of commercial innovation and mission critical defense are so central to our world today. Welcome to the Tech and Space Leader Show, where we learn lessons from leaders of the next frontier. I am your host, Lisa Dreher, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest for today, retired Air Force Colonel Mike Morgan. He is CEO of Military Insights Knowledge and Enlightenment, or Mike. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your service, and thank you for being here today.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite. It's an honor to be on your show. I've watched several of the podcasts. We have a mutual friend, Judy Robinette. I'll give a shout out to her. She's like the mama bear of venture capital. And just a person,
Absolutely.
yeah. Thank you, Judy, for um, strong arming me to do this. But I'm really excited to be here.
Excellent, excellent. Well, maybe we can start by having you just give a little bit of background on yourself and what you're doing at Mike.
Sure. And we had a little bit of a discussion about this, the name. I mean, in some ways, the words were meaningful and impactful. I kind of focus on primarily a defense acquisition frontier technology as my consulting practice, but really, I wanted my acronym to be Mike for my consulting firm. And within the past 3 years, the ecosystem here in Arizona kind of knows me as the Mike LLC guy. So it seems to be working in that regard. So I'll be up at a technology event tomorrow up in Flagstaff with the Space Commission as well and see if it still carries. But I mean, if you look at later in my career, where am I at? I'm primarily focused on being the best husband. My wife for over 40 years, Debbie, father of 3 adult sons and 3 grandkids. And I thought I'd be really just focused on that. And I do. I spend a lot of time with that. But later in life, it was like, I think my best value for me to be professionally involved is broadly and strategically. And rather than work for just one company, which I've done after I retired out of the Pentagon in 2018, I decided to do my consulting firm. The premise or the thesis was, hey, I think I have a lot to offer broadly. Give it a go. And so 3 years in, still here, clients and maybe some new clients, and get to work at some really cool companies. And so I'm excited to just every day is a new adventure in the consulting world, staying really busy. And hopefully we'll have some good interchange today with the standpoint of, like you said, the world is changing so fast. And I'm trying to do from my very small position here from a one-person consulting firm to move the technology forward into the Department of War.
Excellent, excellent. So, how has your perspective actually changed from a perspective of mission readiness involved and then over to more the emerging technologies? How has your perspective changed, as
I mean, that's a great question, Lisa. I mean,
private practice?
yeah, a big difference, but also not a big difference, right? So in the military, I spent my career in the Air Force. Well, I did have a 2.5 year tour as a Joint Task Force commander, so I got a little bit of a perspective from a joint operator's perspective. I mean, the in the military, I mean, it's pretty specific. I mean, you walk the flight line, you're with the airmen every day. Your mission readiness is actually visible and tangible, and everything is tracked in systems as well. But it's all based on programmatics, right? So this is what you've been assigned to do. This is the programs that you have. I think the lens I bring now for my consulting practice is, man, the aperture of what you need to track as a military leader commander from that focus is pretty broad, right? I mean, and you have to forward look because the threat scenarios and the systems that are out there trying to attack you are changing that fast. I mean, just look at the current examples that we have right now in the 2 theaters right now with Ukraine and Iran. I mean, every day seems to bring a new public release of some thing going on that we should be concerned about. And so the technology is changing that fast. So
Yeah.
my focus with what I do, Lisa, is primarily trying to pull that forward, connecting what I call frontier or breakthrough technologies to funded programs. That's kind of a focus of mine, and to a certain extent to get outside funding and partnerships as well in 3 specific areas that we can talk about today. I do some level of work in quantum, primarily the neutral atom quantum technology. I starting to do a little bit of work in topological acoustics. Maybe terms your viewership is aware or not, but Arizona is a pioneering state in that aspect. AML infrastructures, I think that that's a proposition that still needs to be looked at more thoroughly. We need to rebuild these systems from scratch. Nobody wants to talk about that, but it's probably necessary. Patching is showing continually that it's not the way forward. And then I do a lot of discussions and do some advising in the space infrastructure world. I believe that that's probably the short pole in the tent, right? If everybody does what they say they're going to do in new space, whether it's just the military focus or more broadly, we need more infrastructure. So I think that's support that doesn't get enough attention as well.
Indeed. Oh my gosh. Okay, so that is a huge, broad swath of
Yeah.
deep technologies that you're working on. What do you think has been the most significant technological shift in, you've spent 30 years of service and up until now, what's been that like
Yeah, I think
amazing?
so. Well, as I was reviewing my notes, I had some pretty set things I wanted to talk about. As we had a little bit of a discussion before this discussion, I think the thing I'd want to point out that's driving a lot of this that seems a little geeky, it's doctrinally for my buddies out there in the doctrinal world. But I mean, a tip of the hat to a retired four-star General Joe Dunford. Back when General Dunford was the chairman, he introduced this concept called information as the seventh joint function, right? So as important as logistics and fires and things that we think about in the military, he brought up information as that seventh thing that every commander has to think about. And that's kind of changed a lot. I think that was in 2018, 2019 time, 2018 time. And so if you think about where we're now, where information, it's the digitization of the battle space, right? I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about, information dominance. And I think that's the part that I think it is running fast to catch up and is a continual cycle that we need to keep looking at. In the military, we had these things called OODA loops. We observe, we orient, decide, and act. And now we just have to do that at hyper speed. What used to take, literally, I'm going to go back, maybe a few years ago, maybe like weeks and months, they're now in minutes and seconds in some cases with some of these technologies. And as a leader or a commander, you have to think about in those cycles and at that speed. So I think that's the thing that probably I think has changed the most, just the digitization of the battlefield and the decision-making cycles for leaders to have to make decisions and quality decisions where lives are at stake, right?
Yeah.
For me, I think I'll give an example of one of the companies I'm working with. I won't mention the name to keep it non-existent, but I mean, the premise is like, if you read about every day, we talk about these cyber attacks and hacks and things that are going on. And I relate that to the infrastructure for running governments and operating in our military environments, right? Too, and I think that infrastructure is not sufficient, right? If you do some deep analysis, there's a lot of hodgepodging and patching that goes along. One of the things I'm really focused on is trying to rebuild that infrastructure from the database forward with new infrastructure. It's challenging. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not the easiest thing to do, but I think it'll be necessary, say from now to the next 10-year horizon, to actually truly have these thinking systems that we trust that operate these speeds as well.
Right. So you're talking about, things moving so much
Yeah.
faster. And I think from a military perspective, they're a little bit notoriously known for
Yeah.
slow procurement cycles. And of course, tech moves fast. So how do you kind of bring those two things together so that we're really better supporting those warfighters that are out there in the field?
Yeah, I think, and I'm very fortunate. I truly get a chance to work with true startups. I work with a lot of defense primes. I work with a lot of companies that are like one of my clients just went actually public through a SPAC merger IPO, so, and kind of was there from the process of pre-Series C round to the SPAC merger IPO, and to kind of see them grow and develop and see what that looks like from a perspective of that company. But I mean, the reality is that most startups, think about the DoD as this like solution to their problems, or this monolithic customer, and where they have to aim small, miss small, but also think big. You might have like a technology that is useful and can solve a problem, but you have to actually introduce that into a cycle where funding is already laid out. You have to enter that into programs that are already laid out, right, and programmed for. And now you're trying to change that. It's a pretty difficult process. I think most startups have a difficult time understanding that, right? Don't say stop doing it, just know what you're getting into. The second part is a lot of people speak their technology really well, the technologists, right? But they have no understand truly what the warfighter needs, and at least that term warfighter, but the military customers needs, right? They haven't been in that person's shoes, and so they're trying to inject their specific technology piece into a system, knowing that they're going to change the world by injecting that one piece. And it almost never works that way, right? You need to actually have maybe a technology piece that fits into a mission solution that matches to a funded requirement, and you really have to map it to that level to ensure some level of success, for your interest in selling to the military. So for me, as the consultant, I almost completely do advising, consulting, those kinds of things. Try to bring those things to be more credible. Part of it's just my understanding of that, having been that, I would say, bureaucrat. The person at the Pentagon up till 2018, I did some of those things and was the yes or no, or at the person that advised for the yes or no. So I understand the decision-making cycles. That's helpful for companies as well. And having been the operational commander, understanding kind of what those mission needs are and how they kind of inject into the process as well. So I think that's kind of where I would take this from, this, how you help the warfighters, how them get there, is really just understanding level setting expectations and having a true mapped out game plan before you go attack something and spend maybe years of your life that was doomed for failure on the front end.
Yeah, yeah. So you talked a little bit about a lot of emerging technologies in our opener. From a commander's point of view, what do you see as the biggest risk of, I guess, maybe over relying on autonomous systems, AI, other technologies like that?
So that's going to go back to my infrastructure point, right? So, and I'll couple that with an example I'll give here in a minute is our complacency of judgment. On the one hand, we're really fearful of technology and change. You read about it every day. But on the other hand, you pick up something like, hey, here's my communication device, here's my navigation device, and you just kind of do what it says, right? Complacency. But what happens in the military when that system is spoofed, jammed, maybe denied, right? So I think that's the part that I think I'm concerned about. I don't think our systems are robust enough yet to actually but trust against all that, right? So I think that goes back to my preposition where I'm working with companies to try to build infrastructure that makes that more trustworthy, by design, auditable, and accountable, so that those people that do that can understand that the information that's being provided, especially in decision-making processes where humans' lives are at stake, they're trusted infrastructure, right? So I think that's the part that I want to bring to the market with some of the customer I'm working in. But I gave you the GPS example just as an idea, but in general, and we're seeing a lot of that going on globally, spoofing, right? For example, we will have to address that not only with the navigation aids, but everything that we're ingesting into our thinking cycle that causes us to think very quickly, decide, and act that could be nefariously, changed to be something negative for us, right? And I think that's going to continue on for as long as we're going to be using these technologies, just probably forever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. How do you see orbital logistics impacting or changing how the military handles global connectivity and intelligence?
I, I think for many of your viewership here, because I think that a lot of people that watch your show are already tied to this discussion, right? But in general, if you go back to we are an information world, an information economy globally. The space layer is probably the most critical piece of it, right? I mean, so it's that big. I mean, it's one of those things where everybody that has some kind of a consumer electronic or the military electronics, the space layer really makes it happen. I mean, others will say that yeah, we're but literally for us to be a global communicating society, it is the space layer that's the most important. So I think the thing that logistically is, and we're seeing some of this is the democratization of orbital capability, right? So we're seeing a lot of commercial companies spend billions and maybe trillions of dollars to be able to deliver that. I think the military is actually taking advantage of that investment by the private sector, because now we can actually work with them on those and not have to build bespoke systems. And there's a lot of discussion about that. But I think that the thing that most concerns me there is, again, that resilience piece. Everything we're putting into space at some point is somewhat susceptible to attack. We're seeing some of that as well. So I think that the resilience piece, along with infrastructure piece, goes into space, right? I mean, the proliferation helps, but to a certain extent, depending on how you attack that, it could be also the thing that breaks you as well. How
Right.
deeply are you controlled, right? I think that I'm kind of focused on another area of that piece of it, on the space infrastructure piece, is the quantum technology piece. I do a lot of traveling with one of my clients, and we have direct conversations with potential government buyers. And it's amazing to me, one, how fast the acceptance of maturing quantum technology is going to be incorporated into the actual mission sets. Things like miniaturization of sensors, for example, using quantum techniques. Quantum atomic clocks, for example, are another area that are getting a lot of attention. And the software tools to be able to incorporate those algorithms and applications into these quantum systems is a fast growing area as well. I think all are going to be necessary for the space infrastructure economy to continue to grow. And so I think in that regard, my little small piece of it is actually to help some of that stuff grow at the very specific level. So, with
So I
time.
think that brings up a really good point, and that is that what are some of the most common mistakes you see commercial tech leaders make when they're trying to translate their technologies to a DoD buyer, for example?
Yeah, and so not the mature companies because they've made all the mistakes, but I say for a lot of the startup companies or newer companies, right, or ones that are just starting to sell into the especially the military markets, right? Three consistent things. In all honesty, they're avoidable, right? So the first is leading with your technology instead of the problem. Always trying to inject you into the situation rather than trying to actually solve a problem. I think a lot of the technologists fall in love with what they're doing. I get to work with a lot of people that are very, very smart, a lot of PhDs, and they're in love with what they're doing. It's cool, right? But the reality is, does that actually solve a useful problem that is both identified and hopefully funded in working towards a program of record? I see that mistake all the time. If they would just do what I tell them to do, the whole world would be better and buy my product, right? And it just doesn't work that. From I say the vast majority of us, it just doesn't work that, right? I think the second is just understanding when you say, "Hey, I want to sell to the military," the compliance burden. It is a huge thing, right? And it's changing. Whether you're selling globally and you have ITAR restrictions, are you going to be using a classified program at some point, and nobody really thinks about the process to get into those areas. Something as simple as CMMC compliance, just for your basic information sharing with government clients. These are very bureaucratically challenging things for a small company to undertake. And you really need to think about that before you go say, I'm going to go sell to the government, if you really don't want to participate or take the time and investment to do that. And I think third and probably the most common thing is just impatience. I mean, I'm ready to sell this stuff right now. And these defense acquisition timelines, I mean, they're just not fast. I mean, we're doing things faster. I mean, I think you're tracking some for your past shows, but in general, these defense requirement processes just don't levy out quickly.
Yeah.
And that's the part that probably most people are frustrated with. Can you really, put together a 3-year strategy to get to a program of record with your technology, which is probably what it takes for most of these clients. Otherwise, it probably isn't something you should be pursuing if you don't have the ability to fund that or a path to fund that as well.
Right, right, right. And I mean, I think you're also talking about dual use technologies a lot of times, right? Where we're using it both for commercial uses as well as military defense sector solutions. How do you evaluate the, I guess, security and resilience of these solutions in order to make them relevant to both in a dual use situation like that?
Yeah, I mean, first, when I talk to potential clients and current clients, I mean, in some ways, as you're looking at the problem resolution, or you're looking at it through the adversary's lens. I mean, what are they trusting against, or what are the adversaries doing that we're aware of that we should be concerned about, right? So the dual use capabilities usually are there because they can get us there faster, incorporating into existing commercial development cycles. One, you don't have to spend that money on the front end as a government buyer. And number two, they're already defined a market. They're not doing this for, most companies just don't do it for basic science. There's a market that's been identified that will help them to, carry their technology forward irrespective of the government buyer. But I think that the government buyer surely gives validity and gives them some consistency with their product sales as well. Um, but I think the most one of the more challenging part about that for the government is when you're including that into your mission sets. I mean, has that particular dual use company or that commercial company you're bringing to dual use, do they have a good supply chain integrity, right? In other words, components and pieces come from global factories, software is built globally. Do we trust that your commercial technology is something that we should use? And can you prove that, right? I think that's especially in the software world. I think the next piece is just even if you can meet all those requirements, is there an operational resilience piece? Do you have an ability to maintain, keep that system going at the government use case level, and maybe even the scaling of that as well? Let's say that they want to incorporate what you're doing into an enterprise level solution. Is there a path to bring that into the actual enterprise with your company, and probably with a partner? But I mean, is that even something you thought about? So those are things I think I think about when I think dual use, and I also think about advising my clients as well.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be here today and talk about your company, your consulting company, Military Insights, Knowledge, and Enlightenment, or Mike. If someone wanted to learn more about your organization, what should they do?
So email is ceo@mike-llc.com and reach out to me. And I'm a big LinkedIn fan as well. So LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for making time to be here today. This was
Thanks, Lisa.
an enlightening conversation.
I'm honored. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And I do want to take a moment to thank GuideForce for hosting these sessions. To learn more about GuideForce, you can visit guideforce.com. And we'll see you next time on the Tech and Space Leaders Show.